Could do the
Hello, hello. Thanks to everyone who is joining us live. This is John, Becky, and Lucian from the Stub Group team. Looking forward to chatting with you today, chatting together and having you listen in and hopefully engage here all about Google policy and the Google suspension world. So I'll give a couple minutes here for people to join and get settled in. And while we do that, Becky, Lucian, got a question for each of you. What is a favorite book or podcast that you've been listening to recently, listening to or reading? Becky, you can go first. What's on your agenda recently?
So, everyone here at Stub Group knows I'm a little bit of a professed true crime junkie. I've strayed a little bit from those podcasts recently. I've been listening to one called Witnessed. It is about screenwriter Gary DeVore. I don't know if y'all are familiar with who he is, but he was a pretty famous screenwriter back in the 90s that worked on a lot of action movies that were based around like the CIA, FBI, international crime, things like that. And he was ultimately missing and murdered in 1997. And there's a whole lot of conspiracy theories around that that discuss whether or not he was actually in the CIA, which gave him insight into writing all of the great things that he wrote about in movies and things like that. So that's been my joy to listen to lately. Distraction from real life, from Google suspensions, policy violations, all of that good stuff. So yeah, that's what's been my distraction from the day to day lately.
Nice. That sounds like a good distraction. How about you, Lucian?
I am recently a new dad, so lots of dad books, lots of parenting books, marriage books, Christian books, and then a business book that recently I enjoyed was called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So he was a former FBI negotiator, but the tips in the book basically apply to any relationship. So it's pretty good.
Very cool. And apply well to, I'm sure, communicating with Google as well. Plenty of negotiations that we get to have there.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive into things. Again, thanks for everyone who is who's watching here. Today, we're going to be talking about all things Google policy and Google suspensions. And whether you have never heard of what a Google suspension is, or if you have the misfortune to be dealing with one right now, the goal is for this conversation to be useful and helpful for you. Again, we want to talk about both how do you prevent suspensions from happening, how do you keep everything that you do compliant with Google, and then if you have had the misfortune of being flagged, being suspended by Google, what can you do to get out of that, get that red flag of death, as I like to say, off of your account? So this is also meant to be, a live Q&A as the message at the top of this event. So as you have questions, please submit those. And I can't promise we have all the answers, but we have a lot of answers, and we will do our best to answer the questions that you submit. And we also have lots of things to talk about and share as we go here. So I'll be watching for those questions, and if anything, is striking your curiosity bone, please let us know. So first, let me give a little bit of background for how Google kind of approaches suspensions. Especially, this is going to be useful for people who have not had to deal with this, but are saying, "Hey, how is there an hour's worth of content to talk about suspensions? Isn't it as simple as, hey, if you do something Google doesn't like, don't they just tell you what to do to fix it, and then you move on in life?" And the reality is, it's unfortunately not that simple. So here's kind of the background of Google policy and compliance and how this works and how you want to think about it. Google wants to keep its customers, which are people who use Google to find information, safe online. Google wants to remain credible. They don't want people having a bad experience after they go through a Google product, if they go through a Google search. And that applies across a wide variety of areas. So, for example, Google doesn't want a situation where someone's clicking through a Google ad and is being scammed. They're purchasing a product and paying money to an advertiser and they never get that product. Or they click through a Google ad, they get to a website and malware is installed on their website or on their computer by that website. Those types of things are obviously very problematic and impact Google's credibility and also creates liability for Google in the eyes of its user base. And so Google has a large number of policies in place that they require Google advertisers to follow in order to safeguard themselves and in order to safeguard people who use Google. And I am grateful that they have these in place, because without them, it would be the wild, wild west, as it used to be. And it has been at many times in the past as Google has built out and created these policies, generally in response to scams and to illegitimate businesses. And just to give you some context, Google flags, I think it's last year, they flagged over 5 billion ads, and they suspended over, I think it was about 6.7 million advertiser accounts last year. So just give you some sense for the scope of what Google is doing to protect users. It's massive. The flip side of that is, because it's so massive, there are many legitimate advertisers who also get caught up in that same net and who are not intentionally violating Google's policies. They are not harming users. And sometimes they aren't even actually violating Google's policies, but either they've done something accidentally or Google flags them incorrectly and they get that red bar of death. Either their ad is disapproved or their account is suspended and they can no longer advertise with Google. And so this is a really massive problem for many businesses, because Google is where we go to find information, to find products, to find services. And if you as a business cannot reach potential customers through Google, I've seen businesses go under literally because of not having that ability, or at the very least, your ability to generate revenue can be massively, massively negatively impacted. And so that's where being compliant with Google policies and understanding how to fix a problem when it occurs kind of comes into play. And we'll talk more about, lots of specifics during this conversation. I'd like to turn to you for a minute here, Becky, because you have the opportunity to speak to many, many business owners and marketing managers and so forth who reach out to Stub Group, who are looking both for our management services in effectively managing Google Ads campaigns and campaigns across other digital advertising platforms, as well as people who have suspension issues right now and want help getting those resolved. So really, in that suspension side of things, what would you say are some of the most common questions that you're hearing from business owners who reach out to us?
Mhm.
And also, are there any common misconceptions that people have about Google Ads or the suspension process that you hear coming up again and again?
Yeah, I think, the most common question is the one that you kind of hit on already, which is, why can't Google just let me spend my money? I'm a legitimate business. I just want to pay them. It doesn't make sense that they would not, or just want to take my money and run with it. And, I explained to them that it's not that they don't want your money. They want to run ads for you. They want to help your business be successful. But from a capacity standpoint, like you mentioned, there are millions and millions of people who have dealt with suspensions in businesses, from very tiny businesses spending, $10 a day on Google, all the way up to monsters spending $100,000 a day on Google. We talk to all of them, and there isn't a rhyme or reason to who, why, what, when, where, and how Google is suspending these accounts. Now, there's obviously an algorithm and a method to the madness, and those algorithms are programmed to detect real problems, which they do, but sometimes they get confused. And explaining that it's not a person that's dinging your account every 5 minutes saying, "Oh, this is wrong, still suspended. This is wrong, still suspended." That there's a different method that Google's trying to get in place to make this work that's causing the problem is always the beginning part of the conversation. Lots and lots of misconceptions exist across the boards when it comes to Google compliance, Google suspensions, disapprovals. I think that what I would say one of the biggest ones is that Google, doesn't think that you're valuable enough, so they just don't care. And like I mentioned a minute ago, it's not like that. These suspensions are coming in from businesses of all shapes and sizes in all different verticals, different industries across the boards. So there isn't a world where your business in particular is being targeted unless you're actually in a business that is advertising against one of the policies that Google actually has in place. I think another thing is that when dealing with a Google suspension, it's kind of a one-stop shop, right? People and businesses often assume that it's go in, tell Google you're not doing anything wrong, and you're unsuspended. if there's a merchant center involved, if there's an ad account suspension. It's not something that you can just go in and get fixed in one shot. When that merchant center is suspended, how you attack that suspension is different and dependent on what type of suspension might or might not exist within the ad account. So explaining that, we have to get your merchant center unsuspended first, and then we have to do a completely different process when it comes to getting your ad account unsuspended, is something that a lot of people don't know. And then that can be even further complicated based off of the things that we find that might be causing the suspension or triggering it. If there's a problem in the payment profile, that's a completely different group of people at Google that we have to reach out to on your behalf in order to get things in line. And so the steps we have to take to complete that process, it's not something that is this, cut and paste process. Every single suspension is different. Yes, we have ways that we know have worked in the past, and we try to follow that methodology. But many times we're like, oh, this is still here. This is a problem. And Lucian and his team are really great at finding those really small things that have to be attacked a little bit differently to resolve the suspension. So I would say those are probably the biggest questions and misconceptions that we see in the very beginning part of our conversations.
Yeah, I think I'll double click on a couple of those things too that I think are particularly important to emphasize. So like you mentioned, AI, automation being such a massive factor. It is both in the flagging of accounts as well as the reviewing of appeals. Is a very highly automated process. So like you mentioned, often it's not a human who's looking at your website and saying there's a problem. It's the algorithms or robot crawling that's coded to look for specific things. It could be phrases, it could be missing policy pages, it could be fill in the blank. And when it sees those problems, it will flag you. Conversely, then also when you go and submit an appeal to Google, often it's not a human who's actually reviewing that appeal. It's an automated system because, like you said, the scale of the number of appeals, the number of problems that Google has to deal with is just more than the number of physical people that they have on staff. And so I'd say one of the common things I see when businesses hire us to help them get unsuspended is they're saying, look, it's common sense. Obviously, we're not doing anything illegitimate. We've been in business forever. We have all these documents. We've spent so much money with Google. If someone just, applies 2 seconds of common sense at Google looking at our situation, they'll see that we shouldn't be suspended. Right. The problem is that there may not actually be a human at Google who is spending even 2 seconds of applying common sense. And so that's where it's incredibly important that you fix all the things on your website and in your account that could be flagged in that automated system, as well as constructing an appeal in a way that the automated system, is likely to smile favorably upon you, and basically checking the boxes of things that we've learned that Google wants to see when you submit appeals. So I think that's a really important distinction to make, because again, I understand the frustration. I share the frustration. There's so many situations where we just look at this. Common sense says there's no problem here, but frankly, common sense is not always built into the process that we get to work with through Google. And so that's where we apply, the expertise of what we learned over the years.
Yeah, I always tell leads that I don't think that, Google doesn't understand how to look at this from a holistic point of view. They know that there's a picture there. They're programmed to see that picture, but sometimes it's our job to connect the dots for them, right? By providing them a map or, dot to dot page, color by number, whatever it takes to give them an idea of what that whole picture might look like.
Exactly. A common mistake too that I see advertisers make is that when they get suspended, they ask Google through the appeal process, why was I suspended? Right. So Google has an appeal process. When you get your account suspended, you can submit an appeal providing a number of pieces of information they require, and then also basically stating your case, saying, hey, here's why I don't believe I should be suspended. But Google does not have a process in place to respond to a question and an appeal with substantive information. So in other words, if you submit an appeal and you're just saying, hey, I don't know what I did wrong, tell me, or hey, I didn't do anything wrong, tell me what I did wrong, etc. You're not going to get an answer from Google beyond kind of their boilerplate, oh, you violated this policy, go click the link and read it. And B, your appeal is going to be declined because you're not proving to them that you've addressed the issue or proving to them that the issue never existed to begin with. and you're just hurting your chances of future appeals being successful by submitting that type of question as an appeal. Now, that's not to say that, hey, if you've already submitted an appeal like this and asked this question of Google, it's still possible to get you unsuspended. There's not a specific number of appeal limit per se, where Google says, okay, if you submit 2 appeals, no more after this. But there is a reality that every appeal you submit, you want to put your best foot forward and try to fix everything, because there is, I think, a law of diminishing returns that we've seen where, again, we've had situations where the 5th or 6th appeal has worked, but if you just keep submitting the same information to Google and nothing's changing, and you're just sending the same information to Google, there's also a reality where Google's probably going to be less and less likely over time to really review those appeals, and certainly to send them to a manual team to review, because they feel like you're not trying hard to fix the problem. You're just saying, hey, what's going on? So that's very important to keep in mind. If you get suspended, you want to put your best foot forward, and asking Google what went wrong isn't really going to get you a substantive answer. Lucian, love to bring you into things here. Specifically, when it comes to that question of what did I do wrong, Google doesn't tell you specifically, but they do point to a bunch of different policy pages that they have. So what would you say are some of the most common policy violations that you're seeing right now with the businesses who are hiring us to get them unsuspended?
Yeah, some of the most common suspension types: circumventing, probably the most common we see; suspicious payments, unacceptable business practices, counterfeit goods. I would say those are probably the 4 most common, with circumventing definitely being the most common.
Yep, that makes sense. And if you're watching this and you're curious about specific policy types, we're about to release a video on our YouTube channel where we go in depth through all of Google's policies, just kind of talking through them, providing context and ideas. I think it's about an hour long. So if you want to deep dive, just going through Google's policies, go check out that video that we're going to drop here shortly. Again, the reality is, like we talked about, that Google's fairly high level in the information they share in those policies. So if you get flagged for circumventing, Google may share some examples of things that could fall under that policy. But they're not giving you a comprehensive list of, hey, look through every single thing in this checklist and see if you did this thing. And that's intentional, because Google doesn't want to give a playbook to illegitimate advertisers to be able to game the system. So there's a lot of intentionality behind them kind of being fairly vague. And there's also the fact that they don't want to create liability for themselves by being too specific. So they keep things vague, which is fun to work with and deal with, but that's unfortunately reality of where things are at. Becky, question for you. So we talked about some of the most common types of suspensions. We've also obviously seen categories of businesses, types of businesses where Google is much more likely to suspend you, much more kind of paranoid about things. Can you walk through, what are some of those common, more sensitive business verticals that we've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So some are a little bit more simple, and you would think that there should never be a problem with it. But, I know that 2 of the biggest businesses that we see getting suspended, not just singularly, but repeatedly, are those in the affiliate marketing business, as well as in the drop shipping business. And, for affiliate marketers, the primary reason that they do get suspended most of the time is what Lucian was saying: circumventing systems. And a lot of times they don't understand 2 things. The first thing is, my website has anything to do with the suspension? It doesn't make any sense. And the answer is, yeah, it does have to do with it. And the first thing they'll say is, well, there's 50 other people with the exact same landing page as me that are out there running ads right now, and they're not having problems. And I explained to them that, there's really no way for us to understand why that happens. But once you get in Google jail, as Lucian likes to call it, it's a lot harder to get out, right? So once you're a suspect, right? Once Google even thinks for a second that you've done something wrong, even if you haven't done it, in order to get out of Google jail, you have to go above and beyond what anyone else is doing, even your competitors. You have to prove to Google that you're legitimate. So a lot of times it does involve adding more content to that particular website or landing page that you're using as an affiliate marketer. And, with affiliates, I think the primary reason that Google is confused is because the only option that exists on most affiliate marketing landing pages is to click and go to another website. It's not a redirect necessarily, but it's hard for Google to crawl and confirm that the information in your ad account matches up with the information on that lander. So once you're in that hole, it's just all about digging out in a way that helps Google connect those dots that I mentioned earlier. With drop shipping and e-commerce businesses, there's two different things that really happen that cause problems with those accounts. Is a lot of times people don't understand fluently enough what the connection between the merchant center and the ad account is. Sometimes we'll have people come in and tell us it's just their merchant center suspended. They don't even know that the ad account is suspended, and vice versa. And the way Lucian's team has to attack that suspension is dependent. So let's say the ad account is suspended for terms and conditions. Lucian's going to go in and get that GMC unsuspended first, right? Ad account suspended for suspicious payments. You could be going over and over again appealing that Google Merchant Center suspension, and nothing's ever going to happen till you fix that ad account first. So understanding those parts of their business is really important. And then also understanding that Google, what was it, just about 2 months ago, released a whole new document on all the things that they want people to share to prove that they're legitimate when it comes to Google Shopping specifically, right? To prevent misrepresentation suspensions. And just building out a website to sell the items that you want to drop ship is great for you to do initially. And it's not a problem. You can have any kind of website you want, but you can't have any kind of website you want and run Google Shopping ads. Google needs more from you. And so that's something that gets people into a lot of hot water when it comes to getting suspended on Google, because then you've gotten in Google jail, and there's all these different things that you might have to do to get out. You might have to change images. You're going to have to change your policies, all the things that other people might not have had to do to run ads. Now you do have to do. So those are two of the more heavily triggered businesses from Google Ads, suspensions, and Google Merchant Center suspensions. And then the other places where we do see problems is the government services sector, as well as like cryptocurrency. People are very confused by the policies around credit repair in particular, because again, you get that number one thing that they say: here's 5 links to 5 people that are running these ads right now. Why am I the one suspended? And there isn't a clear answer to that, but there is a clear workaround. We in fact just got a credit repair company unsuspended today. So, we have the ability to figure out what Google wants. But when you are in those heavily monitored spaces, or even in those a little bit more questionable, nuanced business spaces like affiliate marketing and drop shipping, not that they're bad or questionable businesses, but because the information is harder for Google to track between ad account to website to merchant center, you just have to be a little bit more careful whenever you're building those things out.
Absolutely. Drew, in the comments, thanks so much for your contributions here. You just asked, how do you find out that you need to do the things? Which is a really great question, because if Google isn't telling you, what you need to do, how do you figure that out?
Right.
So, I'll kind of give you the short and the long answer. Obviously, you want to read through as much as possible the documentation that Google does provide. Again, you could check out that video we made walking through things. Every nugget that Google provides is helpful and useful. And there are some things that you can see, oh, okay, they say I want X, Y, and Z. Let's make sure I got X, Y, and Z on my website, my account, etc. Then there's often, nuances for different types of industries. There's things that we've learned that Google does or doesn't like to see in the supplements space, for example,
Right.
health-related supplements, that they don't explicitly have an article, on Google Help that says do or don't say this, but we've learned over time that Google likes this or doesn't like this.
Right.
And so there's not an easy answer I can give you to say, okay, here's, the 500 things you need to be aware of.
Mhm.
But often it comes down to finding someone with experience in that space like a Stub Group or another premier Google partner that has dealt with these types of issues and can guide you and say, okay, you know what, you're not suspended currently, but we see these 3 things that we're a little scared about on your website or maybe in your ad messaging that we recommend saying it this way or not using this word. Just to give you an example, we've learned that especially in anything health related, if you use the word guarantee on your website, that can be dangerous from Google's perspective, because what Google wants to avoid is you guaranteeing something that you can't. For example, let's say you're offering something related to weight loss. If you guarantee someone's going to lose X number of pounds in X number of days, it's impossible for them to validate that that's possible. And so that's probably something that's going to get you into hot water with Google, because again, they're thinking of things from the consumer perspective, and they don't want consumers to give in a guarantee that Google's not able to validate. Something like, a 30-day back money guarantee, that's something that can be more validated. But if you're using that on a health related site, you may still have problems, because again, Google is using automation and they know, oh, they're selling weight loss products. Oh, the word guarantee is on there. They might not even realize that you're saying, a money back guarantee if you're not happy. They may just say, hey, this is too risky. They might be guaranteeing results and flag you for that.
Yeah. And I wanted to kind of respond to him a little bit there too, because I know that canned response is something that everyone hates getting. And I think one misconception about us is that we're getting something different than that canned response. And most of the time we're not. It's the experience that we've had over the years of what John's saying, in trial, error. We tried this, it didn't work. We found this, it did work. That makes the difference. We often struggle with the same canned responses. I know Lucian has had times where it's a canned response that doesn't even have to do with the type of suspension we've been talking about, right, Lucian?
Yep, that's right. It doesn't make sense always.
Yeah, and so it's definitely a trial and error thing for us across the board when it comes to that. One other thing that we've found that seems to make a difference is back to the drop shipping. Everybody wants to say they have the lowest price, right? So they're saying it's 90% off, it's 75% off. One thing that Lucian's team has found out, I believe, Lucian, if it's more than 50% off, we want to change that, right?
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb, especially if you're suspended for counterfeit goods.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, Drew, to answer your question as best we can, a lot of it comes down to just kind of experience and work with people who have experience and have learned through trial and error what not to do or what to do. I'll share an example recently related to communicating with Google too when it comes to persistence. So I think persistence is another really important part of dealing with Google and getting things unsuspended. Like Becky mentioned earlier, Google's not consistent with how they approach things. Sometimes they'll give you one answer one time and a different answer another time. So for example, we have a client we're working with right now. They need to go through what's called advertiser verification, which is something that Google requires for many businesses at this point, where they need to submit documentation, kind of verifying that they're legitimate, that they are a real business, that their business name is what they say they are, and so forth. And so we're helping a client go through this because their account is paused right now by Google until they're able to go through this successfully. And we've encountered a situation where Google's published information says one thing. It says, hey, we accept X, Y, and Z documents in order to go through this process. But then when we actually go through the process, the way it's structured, they won't let us submit the document that we have, which their documentation says they will accept. And so we reached out to Google and basically says, hey, here's the situation. We're trying to go through advertiser verification. Your documentation says that we can submit this. We can't actually physically submit this through your system. What do we do? And so the initial response we receive from Google is, hey, we see that you have not gone through advertiser verification yet. Please go through advertiser verification. Just like, well, yes, the problem is that's what our question is. We need your help to go through it. And so, we're pushing back and we're still in conversation with them about that. But that type of thing happens all the time, where they just don't understand the question or don't have or they're just following templated responses. And so we have to push, we have to prod, we have to word things a different way, we have to escalate and apply that persistence to getting the account unsuspended and getting through that situation. And it doesn't always happen as fast as you want. It very rarely happens as fast as we want. But that persistence has allowed us to have success in so many situations where a client was giving up, or we were feeling like, okay, we might want to give up, but we know it's possible, and so we keep pushing, and we finally figure out, or get through to Google and get the result that we're looking for. Lucian, question for you. Speaking of contacting Google, reaching out to Google, can you kind of walk viewers through what the options are that exist on their end for reaching out to Google and, again, asking questions or checking on an appeal status or whatever the case may be?
Sure. There's only one way to submit an appeal. It's through Google Ads interface. I wish that we could call up Google and just tell them and explain the situation, but unfortunately, that's not how it works. So that's your only option in terms of submitting an appeal and making your case to Google once you're in jail. In terms of contacting them to get answers, it just depends. Like an agency like Stubgroup, we're able to call them over the phone. If you're not an agency, you might only be able to email them, which is slow and frustrating for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely. And then again, to always set expectations properly. Just because we can talk to our team at Google, again, doesn't mean that they'll tell you, here's what the problem is, but it means that we can push and prod and say, hey, can you please, what's the status of this appeal? Can you push on it? And there are some things too that we're able to get, some little tidbits of information sometimes in some specific areas that can be helpful in figuring out what may have gone wrong. Drew, another question. Great question you've asked here. You said, interesting. I've heard many people talk about getting your first appeal right because you often only get one shot at it before being shunted out of human review. If persistence is key, then how do you test changing one factor at a time until you get the right solution? So great question. The way that we think about this is you want to get everything as right as possible the first time that you submit an appeal. So that means making sure the website looks perfect, making sure that the ad account looks perfect, making sure the appeal is written as well as possible, providing as much documentation as possible to Google, because you never know exactly what the problem is usually, and it could be anything that you have tweaked or fixed in that appeal. So you want it as good as possible when you submit, but then, hey, Google will often reject that appeal. What do you do at that point? Well, you go back to the drawing board and think through, are there any other things that could be an issue, or that maybe you're like, oh, I wondered about this in the first time, but didn't think it was a problem, but there's still a problem. And then you fix all of those things, try to make things as perfect as possible, and then submit again. So I wouldn't do A/B testing. So in the world of ad copy, I'd say, okay, we're going to test this one thing and see if this is a factor. And if this doesn't work, we'll test the next thing and see if it's a factor. In the world of policies, you don't want to get a situation where you have 10 different appeals testing one factor per appeal.
Right.
You want to get everything as right as possible, as much as you can think each time that you do it. And then if Google rejects it, again, you go back to the drawing board and tweak it, come up with new ideas, etc. And that's kind of where the art and the science of working in the Google policy space comes to play, because there are a lot of judgment calls that have been made when you're submitting appeals. Sometimes you're like, hey, it could be a million different things that could have flagged this, and you can't fix every single one realistically. Or sometimes you're like, look, we could make this change, but this is going to change our business model. So we better be sure we need to do this, before we go through with it. And so sometimes in that type of situation, we might not make that particular massive change initially and see if we can get an appeal accepted, because maybe the problem was something else. But then if that appeal comes back and that's declined, then we have to have that conversation, say, hey, this is going to be painful to rework our entire website or to change this offer or whatever. But this is what we have to do next, because everything else that we made perfect didn't fix the problem. And so that's kind of where that persistence comes into play.
Yeah, I think sometimes people make the opposite mistake, and they'll come to us and they'll be like, well, I took everything out of the ad account. There's nothing there. There's no ads. I've removed everything. So there's nothing for Google to even crawl. And even in some cases, they'll ask us if we're going to do that. And I always tell them we try to maintain the integrity of the business as much as possible whenever we're doing this. And one thing that people often get confused is they'll remove every product from a merchant center and it'll no longer appear to be suspended. And they'll think they've gotten their account reinstated, but as soon as they upload their products back in there, they're suspended again, right, Lucian? I saw
Yeah, it's
your
very
hand go up
unfortunate.
there.
Yeah. Yep. It's never a good find.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Alicia, can you kind of describe what to look for if you're in that situation and you have a merchant center that's suspended?
Sure. It just depends what it's suspended for. So if you're suspended for misrepresentation, you just want to make sure everything is consistent throughout the website and it matches what information you're displaying in the merchant center. So it could be a million different reasons, but your policies, business information, things like that. And I would say misrepresentation is the most common reason by far in terms of suspensions in merchant center.
For sure. Great question. Robert just wrote in, said, I saw that Google recently started charging $50 per phone call to their tech support. Is there a way to bypass that, or how do you bypass that? So we actually, I'll answer that here. We also kind of made a video about this week or two ago called Should I Pay Google for Advice? And so this is a pilot program that Google has released where you can pay to essentially get advice from a Googler. Now, this is a little bit different than their general tech support line. In theory, this is supposed to be more kind of performance recommendations oriented. So if you're like, hey, how do I get better performance? Should I use this keyword or that keyword, or can you look at my campaigns, that kind of thing? You can pay Google as part of this pilot program to get that advice. You should still be able, what's the best way of this? If you don't have a suspended account, you should be able to reach out to Google support to ask, questions about tech support, or hey, my ads aren't showing, or that kind of thing. Once your account is suspended and you reach out to Google and you call Google and they require that you enter your account ID, you will probably hear a message saying, basically, your account is suspended. We can't help. And you can't get connected to a person, which is super frustrating because that's literally the time that you most need to speak to a person, is when your account is suspended. In that type of a situation, your options usually are to try to reach out through their email support or maybe chat support that's available to you. On our end, because of our Premier partnership, we're able to get through to their phone team even when an account is suspended, just because of our overall partnership with them. But if you have a suspended account, you may run into that. But kind of going back, Robert, to your question about is it worth spending $50 to talk to Google's team? What I will say is that usually the team members that you're speaking with have kind of a list of best practices that they're going to push you towards. Those best practices may be good for your account, or they may be not. The problem is that generally when you're having that conversation with a Google team member, they don't have enough time or necessarily training to take the nuances of your specific business model and Google Ads account into account. So they may be some really great recommendations for some businesses, and they might not be good recommendations for other businesses, because every business is nuanced, and something that works well for a plumber is not going to work in the same way for an e-commerce website as it is for a lawyer, etc. So sometimes you might find a gem from that conversation with Google, but you have to take all those recommendations with a big grain of salt as well, and factor in the nuances of your business and business model and performance, and don't just take what they say as gospel truth, because it may not be as nuanced as it should be to your specific situation. Hope that's helpful. If you have follow-up questions, please chat those through. Mike, I see a question. Guys helped with a circumventing suspension for a client of ours, and it was not successful. Is it worth trying again after about 6 months of not appealing, or is that not a good idea? So great question. And this brings up a question that obviously we're asked all the time with people who hire us, which is, are you always successful? Do you have 100% success rate?
Right.
And the short answer is that no, we don't control Google. We don't get to make them do what we want them to do. And so there are situations, they're relatively rare, but there are situations where Google is a complete brick wall. And for whatever reason, they will not change their perspective about a suspension. And it could be either they're just not reviewing things anymore, or maybe there is legitimately still a problem that no one's been able to identify with the website, or fill in the blank. And that said, we have seen situations where time is your friend, where literally, we've made everything as perfect as we can. We've submitted perfect appeals to the best of our ability. Google has said no. And we've come back, or our client has come back, 6 months down the road and submitted the same appeal, hasn't made any of the changes, and Google accepts it. And that comes down again to kind of Google's inconsistency as well. So that does happen at times. And if you're in that situation, you've had a lot of time, transpire. It can certainly be worth trying again, submitting an appeal to Google again. It's not going to hurt you because you're already suspended. And so you can only kind of go up from there. Hope that is helpful. I think, big picture, again, a really important way to think about things, or a good way to think about things, and also a common mistake that I see advertisers make, is that they'll kind of throw something half-baked at Google, especially at the beginning of a campaign, or if they're just getting started. So it might be a website that is coming soon. It's not fully finished, and they just kind of want to create an ad, just kind of to test things, be like, oh, what happens if I run an ad? Well, the problem is that's violating Google's policies, because Google wants your website to be fully operational. They don't want to send people to a bad experience. And so you might get your account suspended, not because you're doing anything, fishy or harmful, but because you didn't have everything ready to go when you started. I've seen situations too where, people just kind of haphazardly will enter their information, like their billing information, their address. They don't enter the right address when they enter the credit card. Like, oh, this isn't a big deal. Just throw something in here really quick. And it is a big deal to Google, because they want to make sure they get paid. And they're really, really focused on the billing information you enter, making sure they're going to get paid for the ads that they run. And so we see lots and lots of suspensions, especially suspicious payment related suspensions, where just a little bit more care would have prevented that suspension from taking place. Now, again, you might think, oh, well, no big deal. I'll just put the right address in and I'm good to go. But again, it's not always that simple, because now you're working through Google's system. You're kind of proven guilty until proven innocent is how they approach things. And maybe they see something else small that they don't like about your website or account, which in and of itself didn't flag the suspension. But now that you're suspended, you kind of have a greater burden of proof. You have to fix everything before that they'll be okay with flipping that trigger to bring you back online. So a lot of advertisers can save themselves a lot of headache if you just, are thorough and careful and strategic about all the information you provide to Google, how you set up your account, making sure your website's good to go before you have Google crawl it, and so forth. Question from someone else. What are the most typical issues that trigger a circumventing policy suspension? Great question. Lucian, you want to say, some of the common reasons that we've seen? I know we could talk for another 5 hours about this. What are some of the big ones?
Yeah, it just totally depends on the situation. It really comes down to two main places most of the time. Problems in your Google Ads account. So policy issues, redirects in your account. I would definitely check Policy Manager in Google Ads. And then problems on your website. So maybe you didn't have all the policy pages, some links weren't clickable, dead links, things like that. But most of the time, it's a problem in the account or your website.
Yeah, I think that redirect is a great example. Kind of double click into that. A lot of people don't realize that they either don't realize that using a redirect in your ads is a problem, or they don't realize they're using a redirect. And what a redirect is you put a URL into your ad, which is where someone's supposed to go when they click on your ad, but that there's code on the back end on your website to change URL, either to a different page on your website, or even worse, to a different domain. That's not allowed by Google, because that looks fishy to Google. It looks to them like you're trying to pretend to Google you're sending people to one place, and you're telling people that you're sending them to one place, and then they're going to end up in a different place when they click your ad. And sometimes as simple as, hey, your webmaster has, 303 redirects, I think it is, for SEO purposes, and URLs change over time, but no one told the PPC team, and they're not checking on it. And you end up in a situation where you've got a redirect and don't know about it, and then your site gets flagged.
Yeah, I think another really common one is for people in the service industry. So tow truck drivers, construction companies, anyone who also has a Google My Business page. Super common for people to possibly put their URL for their website in the ad, but maybe they have a site link that's going to their Google My Business page, and they don't realize that that can be a problem. I know that's something we've seen quite a bit.
Yep, absolutely. I can think of a situation very similar to that, and ironically, it was a Google rep who actually
Yeah.
created this problem.
Yeah, I
So
remember.
often when you start a new account, you may be given a couple months of support from a team member at Google to help you kind of kick things off, and they have the authorization, if you give it to them, to make changes in your account. So I remember one situation where a Google rep actually created site links in the Google Ads account that pointed to the client's Google My Business page and to other pages that weren't on their physical domain. And that violates Google's policy. And the client didn't even know to look for that because they didn't create them. And they weren't particularly familiar with Google. So they didn't really understand what's the difference between a site link and an ad and where to go in the account to find the site link. And there was no change history of the change, because when Google makes changes, when Google reps make changes in your account, there's no change history recorded of that. And so the client had no idea what happened. Through our very detailed audit of looking through everything, we were able to find that and say, okay, you know what, here's a problem. We fixed it, specifically mentioned it in the appeal, and got them back online. But it's things like that. It can be little things or big things that can really trip you up. Let's see, looking through our other questions here. Lucian, question for you. I know one thing that we'll often see come up is there might be, let's say, a balance in a Google Ads account where Google says, hey, you still owe us whatever, $10, $500, whatever the number is. But when the advertiser tries to pay that off, Google doesn't accept that payment. Can you kind of speak to that process and what you've seen there and how we deal with that?
Yeah, they want your money, but then they don't let you make a payment. Doesn't make sense. But yeah, if you have an unpaid balance, it might be in the account you're looking at. It might be in an old account that you forgot about. But yeah, if they don't let you make a payment, then they don't let you make a payment. So maybe just mention that in the appeal and tell them that you want to make the payment, but Google's not letting you. I would say that's your best shot.
Yeah. In those situations, often the message that you'll see is something like, you don't have permission to make the payment, which is very confusing to people because they are the payment admin. They should have permission, but that's just kind of Google's default error, which is saying, hey, because your account is suspended, we're not accepting that payment. That unpaid balance thing too, I think, is a really important thing to mention, because we've seen many situations where a client doesn't realize that they have other Google Ads accounts out there that have an unpaid balance. And so they're looking at this account and they're like, there's no unpaid balance here. It says we owe zero money, but they're saying it's unpaid balance. What do we do? For example, we had a situation that comes to mind where client had that exact situation. They were suspended. The account they had access to and were using didn't have an unpaid balance. And through a process of a lot of detective work and working through a lot of things, we actually discovered that a freelancer that they used to work with back in the day had created a Google Ads account for them, had used their credit card in that Google Ads account, and there was an unpaid balance in that account. The client didn't even have access to that account until we found out that it existed and helped them figure it out. And then they reached out to that old freelancer. And once that account unpaid balance was paid off, we were able to get the account we wanted to use unsuspended as well. So sometimes there's things that you don't even know exist out there that could be impacting.
Right. And it just brings up another problem that happens if you don't have access to the payment profile. That's what I was mentioning earlier, where sometimes we go in there and the person can't make the payment because they're not an admin on the account. An agency made it, a freelancer made it, and then that involves an entirely different step, right, Lucian? Right now, I know we have clients that we're waiting on Google to change that payment profile so that we can pay the payment and then process the suspension after that. And right now, that side of Google is really taking a long time in getting back to us.
Yeah, they are.
Yep. Got a couple great questions here. Darla, I'll read yours first. It says, we received a suspicious payment suspension and we cannot get a payment made either. I've tried everything, but I just get the notice that I'm not authorized / don't have permission. I submitted an additional appeal and switched to a new credit card, but still I can't pay the outstanding balance and get the suspension removed. I can't think of any other options to try. I feel your pain, Darla, because we know exactly where you're at. We've seen many clients in this situation. The short answer is, because each situation is unique, I don't know right now to tell you exactly what to do to fix it. But if you want to reach out to us, we'd be happy to dig into things and see if we could help, because often what it comes down to is the problem is not that you have the unpaid balance in the account. The problem is that Google thinks that there's something suspicious about your payment method or your business or something along those lines. And so there's things that we've learned over time that often can be helpful in overturning kind of that base suspension by applying or by submitting specific documentation and making sure the payment profile is structured in a specific way and so forth. So yeah, if you want to reach out to us, be happy to chat about your situation, see if it's something that we can assist with. Austin, a couple questions from you. So question number 1, for addiction niches, can the same LegitScript certification be used on 2 different ad accounts as long as they're both pointing to the same domain? So background for people who don't maybe understand what that question means. LegitScript is a third-party company that Google kind of partners with, or at least trusts, and they are valuable in the addiction recovery and treatment space, as well as some other health related spaces, the CBD space, etc. And so there are certifications that you can get from LegitScript about your website and business that Google then accepts. Essentially, Google says, okay, if you are LegitScript certified for addiction recovery, that means that you've proved you're legitimate, and so Google will allow you to advertise. And so the short answer, Austin, is yes, you can use the same LegitScript certification across multiple accounts. You'll need to go through Google's process for each account. So they have a process where you submit a form to get certified by Google, and you apply or you provide that LegitScript certification ID to them. So you'll need to do that for each ad account. But at the end of the day, they should, in theory, accept that. Now, obviously, and I'm sure you know this, don't do double serving. So if you have multiple accounts and they're showing ads for the same domain for the same exact keyword, for the same exact search term, that's going to violate what Google calls kind of their unfair advantage policy. So just make sure that if you're running multiple accounts, that you're targeting different geographic areas or different keywords to make sure you don't run afoul of that policy. And then second question from Austin is combination of unbounced landing page split testing combined with ClickCease click fraud tool a common trigger of circumventing systems, or are any of these on their own also culprits? Great questions. We actually do a lot of unbalanced landing page split testing ourselves as an agency, and many of our clients too do as well, so very familiar with this. I have not seen that be a cause of suspensions. I'll never say never, because with Google, every day is a new day, but I can't think of any situations where I've seen that be a problem. Now, I will say ClickFunnels, if you're using ClickFunnels, I've seen a lot of issues with ClickFunnels, and so many that, there are some common things you can fix with ClickFunnels that I've seen be problems, but also sometimes we'll just get to the point where we say, hey, let's not use ClickFunnels because the way it's structured can cause problems. Again, not consistent. There's plenty of Google advertisers who use ClickFunnels with no problem. So I'm not going to say you can't use it, but I have seen a lot of issues there. ClickCease is a click fraud monitoring and prevention tool that we've also worked with and some of our clients work with currently. I have not seen that provably be a reason for suspensions. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that one. You can always test removing it and see if that has an impact, but I haven't seen that be an issue. What I have seen be an issue is any kind of software, for example, so WordFence is a plugin on WordPress websites that prevents people from some specific countries from viewing your website. The reason for that is to prevent, hacking from countries. If you're not targeting a particular country and you don't want traffic from there, you might be like, hey, anyone coming from that country is potentially a hacker. Let's prevent them from accessing the website. That can trigger Google's systems to think that you are trying to prevent users from getting to your website or show different information to different people. And so I've seen that type of thing cause suspensions. And looking at your other question here. Yeah, so hopefully that's helpful. Again, unbounce, I have not really seen that be a problem. ClickSeeds, I haven't seen it be a problem. I have seen some other analytics tools be problems though. Anything that you have to be just very careful about anything that changes how your code appears. There's plenty of things that don't have a problem, like call tracking metrics, for example. We work with them for call tracking for our clients that changes a phone number that appears on a website based upon how someone got to the website, the source of the traffic. That's not a problem. I've never seen that cause suspensions, but I have seen some other things that kind of change the code flag Google, because again, Google doesn't want to see anything that looks suspicious. They want everything to be above board. They don't want to think that you're, doing a bait and switch and trying to display one thing to Google's robots and then display other non-compliant information when an actual physical person reaches the website. So that's something you can watch out for. Mohammed, got a question. I know for GMC, just Google Merchant Center, you need to provide transparent business info on the website, but where should we put the official business name? Only in the terms of service or every policy page? Please note that legal business name and store name are completely different. The contact page, the contact us page, especially on e-commerce websites, is something that Google pays a lot of attention to. I recommend put the business name on the contact page, and then also generally put it in the footer of your websites, as well as like terms of service is a great place to put it as well. But I really focus for sure contact and footer. And that's there's a bunch of different things that we found when we do our website. There's a bunch of things like that where we know Google likes to see this here or doesn't like to see that there, and we go through all those types of things to say, hey, tweak this, move this, change this, in ways that we've seen Google be amenable to. Austin, follow-up question. Okay, but CallRail website pool numbers don't have this problem. Yeah, CallRail is also fine. We've worked with many clients using CallRail, using call tracking metrics, using other call softwares, and that I haven't seen that be an issue. Got another user here. Becky, this is why you're laughing. Can you please expand on the word fence issue and maybe bring back the kitty? Well, can't bring back the kitty, but on the word fence issue, yeah, to expand upon that, the best way to put it is that anything that you do to restrict access to your website, either by robots or by physical people, or real people, I guess we're all physical, but by real people, can be something that could trigger Google to think that you're trying to hide information from Google or from real people. So let's take an example. Preventing people from specific countries from accessing your login page on your back end of your website, that's okay. If you're trying to reduce the number of people who could actually get there and try and brute force their way into your website, that's okay. But preventing those people from accessing the homepage on your website, which is something that a tool like WordFence does when it's kind of dialed up to its highest intensity, that is something that can flag Google. It doesn't necessarily violate Google's policies. Like from Google's perspective, as long as you're allowing people from the country in which you're targeting to reach your website, you should be okay. But then there's a big gap between stated policies and sometimes how the algorithm looks at things and flags things. So anything that you're doing to prevent people from accessing your website, if you're suspended, try kind of scaling that back and see if that helps. And if you want to not get suspended, just be very strategic about how you approach that. I think probably our last question we'll get here as we're coming up on time is it okay to have 2 Google Ads accounts for our business, each promoting the same product, but on different websites? One site sells singles, the other in bulk. So to some extent, this goes back to what I mentioned about the unfair advantage and kind of double serving policy, which is that Google does not allow you to show 2 ads for the same domain, or I should say, for the same domain or business at the same time. Now, how they enforce this is also very inconsistent. So you may be like, but I saw this happen, and you probably have. It happens. But from a policy perspective, Google only wants one domain at a time advertising for the same search. So if you have 2 accounts and you're going after, people looking for bulk, bulk kitty litter in one account and, one bag of kitty litter in your other account, make sure that you're either targeting different geographic areas or you're using negative keyword sculpting so that you're not going to show up for the same search term from both accounts.
Mhm.
But to answer your ultimate question, it's not against Google's policies to have multiple ad accounts for the same business. It increases, I would say, your chances of getting flagged. And there's a lot more we could speak into, and there's nuances there that we would want to talk about with you specifically, if you're in that situation. But it's not inherently against Google's policies to have multiple ad accounts for the same website. Well, we are on time. Thank you so much for all the great questions. Hope this was helpful. If you have more questions about suspensions, which you probably will if you're suspended because it's so complicated, go check out our YouTube channel. We have tons of content there, and reach out to us. Again, things are so nuanced that the best way we can help is by learning about your specific situation, nuances of that, and then applying our expertise to that to get you back online. So reach out. Becky will be happy to speak with you more, learn about your situation, and then we'd love to get to work on your behalf. Until next time, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later.